Everyone, I am doing this live stream tonight to talk to you about medicated goat feed. I'm surprised that I hear quite often from people who don't really know what it's for or why to feed it. They just think, oh, medicated goat feed, I'll keep my goats from getting sick. And so they feed it to all their goats all the time. And that's not what it's meant for. The medication in there is a coccidiastat, which means that it interferes with the life cycle of coccidia, which is an oocyst. It is not a worm, but it is a parasite. So when you hear people talking about doing a fecal to find out what kind of a parasite they have, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about figuring out if it's coccidia or worms, not what kind of worm it is, because the worms that cause problems are roundworms, and all the dewormers kill all the roundworms. So the rest of the worms are not usually a problem. But with kids, the most common cause of diarrhea in kids from 3 weeks of age to 5 months is coccidiosis. And so some people have a problem with coccidiosis. And if it's running through your herd, then if you start feeding it to kids who don't have coccidiosis yet, it can help to prevent it. It works completely different from a coccidiaside. Bacox and Corid and sulfa drugs and Prolium, those are all coccidiasides. They kill coccidia. Decox, decoquinate, rumensin, these are the drugs that you find in medicated feeds. They are coccidiastats, and what they do is they slow down the reproduction. They interfere with the life cycle of the coccidia so that a kid doesn't wind up with a overgrowth of coccidia. So there is no reason to feed coccidiastats to adult goats, because adult goats, they have coccidia in their system. They're pretty much immune to them. They don't usually get sick from them unless they are already sick from something else. As far as I can remember, for a long time, the only goat I have that has been treated for coccidia was a doe that almost bled to death after kidding. And she spent a week at the veterinary teaching hospital, and they treated her when she was there. But other than that, none of my adults have had a problem with coccidia. And that's pretty typical. You don't usually see adults with problems unless they have another problem. So the time that you would really use a medicated feed, sorry, typically, you only need to use a medicated feed with kids during times of stress, because stress can cause the coccidia to reproduce and cause a problem. So the most common times for kids to wind up stressed is weaning and or going to a new home. And by weaning, I mean removing them from their mother if they are being dam raised. Technically, weaning starts as soon as a kid starts eating something other than milk, but that's not a problem. Obviously, the stress is removing them from their mom, and that can be either because it's a baby buck that you're keeping and he's getting older and you want to get him away from the girls so that he doesn't get anybody pregnant, or because you're selling the baby goats. So I tell people when they buy baby goats from me that they can feed the kids feed them a medicated feed. Like Purina Goat Grower is medicated. You always know it's medicated because on the feed tag, it says medicated, and it'll have the name of the drug, like Decox, rumensin, whatever, and pretty prominent. So it's hard to miss. The other thing that's on that feed tag that a lot of people don't see is that it says not to be fed to dairy goats of reproduction age. So basically, you're not supposed to feed it to goats that are producing milk for human consumption. And I see this a lot. I've even seen extension agents tell people to feed this to goats that have kids. And their thought is like, oh, we're going to reduce the coccidia in the mom's poop to reduce the risk of the kids picking it up. But that, and it's very frustrating because I was in a workshop one time and somebody brought this up, and the extension agent had never read the label that says that. So it's always important to read all the labels of anything that you buy. You never know when you're going to get surprised and read something that you were not expecting. So you should not feed this to your adult goats. They don't need it. So it's not helping them. It's a waste of money. The other thing is that baby goats, what I tell people is, like, if you want to buy a bag of this when you take your baby goats home, that's fine. Just when you're done with this bag, don't buy another one. I read a study a long time ago that said that there was some correlation between feeding it long term and vitamin E deficiency. And I wish I would have made a note of that somewhere, but I didn't, so I can't find it now. But at some point, hopefully I'll have time. I'll look for that again. But anyway, it's just makes sense that you should not be feeding drugs to an animal that doesn't need it. And so who needs a medicated feed? Possibly kids that are going to a new home, or kids that you are separating from their mom. Typically bucks. We don't ever wean the doelings that we're keeping because I want them to keep nursing. Nothing is as nutritious for them as milk. Nothing has the concentrated protein and calcium that milk does. So they would have to eat a lot of alfalfa hay and goat feed to be able to get the same amount of protein and calcium as they can get in milk, which is easier to consume. Like we all know as humans, it's much easier to drink your calories. So the same thing is true with baby goats. They can get a lot more nutrients if it's liquid than if it's solid food that has a ton of fiber in it. So, and that's why between hay, alfalfa hay has actually as much or more protein in it as a 16% goat feed. But the goat feed is called concentrates because it doesn't have as much bulk to it. So a goat can get the same amount of protein in a smaller amount of grain and of the 16% goat feed than they can in the alfalfa hay. And then a kid is going to get even more protein and calcium even easier by just drinking milk. So as long as kids are with mom and drinking and everything, since we started tracking, and the important thing, I have a whole article on my website about preventing coccidiosis. And because we used to be out there like so many people thinking like, oh, the coccidia is just inevitable every spring with the kids. But then when we started tracking the weight gain of our kids, we discovered that the kids who were gaining at least 4 ounces a day for the first 2 months did not get coccidiosis. And so that's why I'm so adamant now that all my kids need to be gaining that much, or they wind up getting supplemented, or like, that's why if a doe has 4 or 5 kids, I'm going to bottle feed more than, if she has more than 3, basically, I'm going to bottle feed the other, I'm going to bottle feed some of those kids so that she only has to nurse 3 kids. And since we started doing this, it's getting close to 10 years now. We've only had 2 cases of coccidiosis out of all the kids we've had. So I don't think it's a coincidence after almost 10 years that, before we had all these problems and now we don't, because the kids get all of the protein and calcium, they're growing, they're healthy, plus they're getting all of the immunities from the mom's milk. Every now and then somebody doesn't realize that there are immunities in milk, but absolutely there are immunities in goat milk for the baby goats, just like we humans have immunities in our breast milk for our babies. So so there is really no benefit to weaning baby goats. If it's a doe or a wether, and you're keeping the babies, there's no benefit at all to the goat to wean them. So I don't do that at all anymore. We quit doing that long time ago. So if you're watching this later and you've got any questions, feel free to post in the comments section below and I'll get back to you.